In the 1960s, cinema on both sides of the globe was transforming. Hollywood was putting out a steady stream of science fiction B movies, while in Iran, filmmakers were quietly laying the groundwork for one of the most poetic cinematic movements in history. In this video essay, we'll explore how Monster a Go-Go, a 1965 American sci-fi horror film, reflects the commercial emptiness of the mid-century Hollywood, while Gav, or the Cow, a 1969 Iranian masterpiece by Dariush Majuri, embodies the deeply symbolic and socially conscious direction of Iranian cinema. The contrast between these two films reveals why Iranian films of the time carried more meaning, urgency, and soul. By the 1960s, Hollywood was struggling. Television had invaded American homes, the studio system was crumbling, and the youth culture was challenging old norms. In response, studios churned out low-budget genre films, especially horror and sci-fi, to make a quick buck. Monster a Go-Go, directed by Bill Redbane and completed by Herschel Gordon Lewis, is the epitome of this decline. The film is disjointed, incoherent, and more infamous for its confusion than any narrative strength. It wasn't trying to say anything. It was trying to exist, cheaply, quickly, and profitably. If you haven't seen Monster a Go-Go, you're not missing much. The plot revolves around an astronaut who returns to Earth as a radioactive monster, but the film is barely held together, with continuity errors, missing scenes, and a voiceover that essentially says, never mind, by the end. It feels less like a movie and more like an accidental collage. And this wasn't uncommon. Many B movies of the time were produced quickly, with no interest in deeper meaning or emotional resonance. Entertainment, if it came at all, was incidental. Meanwhile, in Iran, cinema was on a very different path. The late 1960s marked the beginning of the Iranian New Wave, a movement fueled by frustration with formulaic commercial films and government censorship. Directors like Dariush Majuri, Farah Farzad, and later Abbas Kiarostami sought to explore the realities of life in Iran with poetic realism. Gav became that spark. It broke from convention, telling a story not just about one man, but about a nation's identity, loss, and transformation. In Gav, a man named Hassan deeply loves and depends on his cow, which represents not just his livelihood, but his entire sense of self. When the cow dies, he loses his grip on reality and begins to believe that he is the cow. On the surface, it's a tragic story, but beneath lies an allegory for cultural dislocation, loss of tradition, and the psychological toll of modernity creeping into rural life. Gav uses minimalism and naturalistic performances to explore profound philosophical questions about identity, community, and alienation. Here's the key difference. Monster a Go-Go was made in a country saturated with media, where movies were often just another product. The US was obsessed with the future, technology, and especially the Cold War. Films like Monster a Go-Go capitalized on nuclear paranoia, but without depth. In contrast, Gav was meaningful because it had to be. Majuri was speaking to and for a people who were rarely represented with dignity on screen. His film wasn't escapism, it was a mirror. Monster a Go-Go, on the other hand, was a symptom of creative stagnation. Film is filler. One tried to understand the human condition, the other tried to stretch a thin idea into 70 minutes of footage. So, what can we learn from comparing these two films? That budget doesn't equal meaning, that simplicity can hold more depth than spectacle, and that when cinema is driven by necessity rather than profit, it often reaches new artistic heights. In the shadow of forgettable monsters, Gav stands tall, as a film that dared to tell the truth, quietly, in a language of metaphor and emotion. While Monster a Go-Go faded into obscurity, Gav helped birth a national cinematic identity that still resonates today. To really understand the chasm between 1960s Hollywood and Iranian cinema, we need to look closely, not just at the films themselves, but at how they function in the specific moments. Let's dive into two scenes, one from Monster a Go-Go and one from Gav. First, Monster a Go-Go. Military personnel are searching for the Creature, an astronaut who's returned from space transformed into a radioactive monster. There's heavy breathing, shaky camera movement, and then a sudden flash of the monster, if you can even call it that. On the surface, this is a standard B-movie chase sequence, but let's analyze how it fails, not just technically, but thematically. The monster is barely shown. There could be effective if used to build suspense, but here it feels like avoidance. The camera shakes, cuts randomly, and the sound is muddled. The viewer is lost and not intrigued. There's no metaphor behind the monster. Unlike other Cold War era films like Day the Earth Stood Still and Invasion of the Body Snatchers, Monster Go-Go offers no real allegory for societal fear, nuclear threat, or identity. It's a monster because they needed a monster. This scene ends abruptly, and the characters respond in stiff, unaffected ways. There's no tension, no emotional stakes. It's just one more disconnected movement in a film stitched together without care. This scene epitomizes a film made for the market, not the mind. It's cinema stripped of meaning. Now, let's shift to Gov. From the cinematography to the pacing, Majuri worked in a completely different cinematic language, one that values silence, observation, and symbolism. Let's examine a key scene that takes place after Hassan's cow has died, but before he fully loses his mind. The scene is quiet, almost unbearably so. Hassan returns from a short trip to find his beloved cow missing. The villagers have hidden the truth. They say she ran away, but the camera lingers on their anxious eyes. Hassan steps into the darkened stable, calling out gently. Long takes in real time. Majuri doesn't cut away. We watch Hassan sit in the empty space where the cow once stood. He waits. Silence grows heavier. We see realization creep in, but it's never stated. Symbolic blocking. Hassan kneels where the cow would normally rest, his hands running along the ground. This action foreshadows his eventual transformation into the cow. It's physical, psychological, and deeply ritualistic, like a mourning ceremony that morphs into possession. Cultural layering. The cow here is more than just an animal. It's a symbol of continuity, sustenance, and tradition. When Hassan loses the cow, he loses his place in the world. It's a metaphor for the post-colonial identity erosion, for how modernity strips rural communities of self and soul. Where Monster Go-Go gave us sound and fury signifying nothing, Gov gives us silence that speaks volumes. Now, let's compare the two directly. In Monster Go-Go, fear is external, a vague thing that is supposedly attacking, but we never feel it. There's no psychological depth, no empathy, but in Gov, fear is internal. The monster isn't out there, it's inside. It's grief, alienation, the slow loss of identity. The Iranian film asks, what happens when your world collapses from within? Additionally, the Monster Go-Go scene relies on spectacle, but lacks the means or intention to execute it. The Gov scene has no spectacle at all, but its minimalism becomes transcendent. Where one fumbles for coherence, the other builds emotional architecture from silence. Scenes are the DNA of cinema. They show us not only what a filmmaker wants to say, but how they see the world. Monster Go-Go treats cinema as a gimmick, something to produce, sell, and forget. Gov treats cinema as ritual, as storytelling, with moral, emotional, and cultural purpose. One scene leaves you with nothing, the other leaves you with questions, echoes, and a strange, quiet ache. And in that ache, in that deliberate stillness, we find the true difference between commercial noise and meaningful art.